Listen, you want to be here watching Guns N' Roses?
Hey everybody, what's going on, and welcome to GNR Central, and today I want to talk about Slash discussing the band Nirvana. Now, we've all heard about the beef between Guns N' Roses and Nirvana dating back to 1991, 1992, but we haven't really heard Slash's point of view of everything and what he thought of those grunge bands, and more specifically Nirvana. So we really have to go back to 91 when Guns N' Roses were filming the Don't Cry video, and that's when a lot of fans started to notice that Axl was a big Nirvana fan, and he wore a hat with the band's logo in the video for Don't Cry. But the feeling wasn't apparently mutual, so promoting Nevermind in 1991, Kurt made every effort to draw a sharp line between what the two bands meant. He said, "We're not your typical Guns N' Roses type of band that absolutely has nothing to say," he told Seconds magazine. The following year, he told a Singapore publication, "Rebellion is standing up to people like Guns N' Roses." And things really came to a head in 1992 when Guns N' Roses wanted Nirvana to open for them along with Metallica on their stadium tour that summer. So despite Kurt's trash talk, Axl was determined to bring Nirvana on tour with GNR, and Guns N' Roses was about to do a massive tour with Metallica, and they wanted to open for us, said Dave Grohl. So Axl had been calling Kurt nonstop, and one day we're walking through an airport and Kurt says, "F, Axl Rose won't stop calling me." So eventually Kurt's comments would get to Axl, and during a show that they were playing with Metallica back in, I think it was around September of 1992, Axl unloaded on Kurt and Courtney and referred to them as effing junkies. So there had been widespread rumors around the time that their baby, Frances Bean Cobain, had been born, that she had a number of birth defects because of Courtney Love's drug use. Now, essentially calling Kurt a snob, Axl mocked the term alternative, saying the only thing that means to me is someone like Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, who is basically just an effing junkie with a junkie wife, and if the baby's born deformed, I think they both ought to go to prison. That's my feeling. So let's go now to 1995. It's been several years since Kurt Cobain and Axl Rose had their run-in at the MTV Video Music Awards, and about a year had passed since Kurt Cobain killed himself. And Slash appeared on Howard Stern's show to promote his first Snake Pit record, It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, and the topic of Axl and Nirvana came up, and here's what Slash had to say.
Didn't he beat Kurt Cobain's ass or something?
No, that was Duff.
I think he took on Courtney.
Oh, did he?
Oh, they got into a fight, yeah. I don't know where. I never get involved with any of that stuff. I just sort of...
Axl beat up Courtney?
Almost.
No.
I think Kurt had to jump in.
She probably needed
They just got into an argument.
Really?
Yeah, she probably should get beat up.
There you go.
I can say that.
Yeah, I guess so.
But, just a couple times,
Right.
Fill the hole, I guess.
Hey, let me see your tattoos, man. I'm thinking...
Fast forward now about 12 years later, Slash is now sober, and he's promoting his autobiography with the same name, and he's on Howard Stern's show once again, and Artie Lang, who used to be on Howard Stern's show, asked Slash what he thought about all these grunge bands, and then there's a separate discussion.
Anybody turning you on musically, or are you just fed up with the whole scene?
I don't have a lot of positive things to say about what's going on with rock and roll right now.
Right.
It's about as far removed from the genuine article as far as I'm concerned. There's some bands that are still around that came out in the 90s, which I might have not thought that much of then, but I think huge, I think they're great now because they're the only bands around that have any inkling of what that kind of rock and roll attitude.
What's an example of one of those bands?
Well, Foo Fighters are great.
Yeah. Foo Fighters are great.
One of the greatest bands that's come out in the last 15 years.
Did it surprise you when the drummer from the Foo Fighters turned out to be a lead singer and guitar player?
Yeah,
I mean, what did I say?
Drummer from Nirvana.
Yeah, from Nirvana.
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw the Foo Fighters was here at what's the place by Dave Letterman.
Roseland.
I saw him at Roseland, and it was great. And that was in not too long after Kurt died.
It was shocking to you, probably.
But he is a great band, and he's a great songwriter.
A couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
How you doing, man? Artie. You guys were like a great sort of band in the tradition of classic, rock and roll. When you saw bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, that whole grunge thing coming on, did you feel like you guys were in trouble in any way?
No. I was really excited. Being that in the 80s we were one of the few sort of hands-down gritty rock and roll bands. There was so much other glam and sort of fake anthem, stadium rock, or whatever you want to call it, going on. When grunge happened, which I still have a hard time calling it that, but in the 90s, in the early 90s, when Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, what's the other band?
Pearl Jam.
Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
And bands like that, those were the main ones. I thought it was great because it was like some new blood, and I was really addicted to a couple of these records.
So it wasn't a turn off to you. You liked it.
What would you rather call it? Just rock and roll, like anything else,
it was
right?
basically just an extension of what we were doing.
Right.
I agree. I agree.
Now, fast forward about 5 more years, Slash is on Howard Stern's show once again, and the topic comes up, and he's on there promoting his first record with Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators, Apocalyptic Love. Now, what's funny about this interview, if you guys don't listen to Howard Stern, Slash was really annoyed about this interview because there was a lot of questions about his divorce, or his first divorce to his ex-wife Perla, and then there's also a lot of talk about Axl and Scott Weiland, and apparently he left the studio pretty pissed, and then he ended up getting a lot of good feedback from people on the street saying, hey, I heard you on Stern, it was a great interview, and then he called back into Howard's show, not live on the air, but then he apologized apparently for being a little bitter earlier, and even when he went on Opie and Anthony's show, he told a similar story. Now, what's also funny is Greg Allman was on the same show. He came in after Slash left, and apparently him and Greg Allman dated the same woman. Slash alluded to this in his 2014 interview, but Howard and Rob didn't pick up who that person was, and he never clarified which woman it was they dated, but they didn't even know that Greg Allman and Slash used to date the same woman, even though there was a pretty big age difference between the two. And even though Slash reiterated that the grunge era of music was really healthy and great for the early 90s, he did talk a bit about Kurt and Courtney's criticism of Axl at the time. Keep in mind, this is 4 years before the GNR reunion happened between Axl and Slash. And Slash basically said he agreed with what Kurt and Courtney were saying, and they had some valid points about Axl.
Did it's often been painted that the end of Guns N' Roses and that era of music was over because of bands like Nirvana. Did you guys hate Nirvana? Did you hate what they were about?
Yeah, no. I mean, Nirvana was great. I think that.
But they were critical of guys like you. They're like,
well, I really, with all due respect to Kurt and Courtney and all that, there was some issues that happened having to do with Axl that I felt like they were totally right.
They were like,
I mean, it's like, it's one thing to be, recognized and famous and stuff. It's a whole different trip. You sort of take your own chances when you start acting like that.
Right.
But anyway, and there was some issues, but I always thought that the 90s was one of the early 90s was a really healthy sort of page for rock and roll.
Even though it meant the end of
it didn't mean shit. It
meant the end of a certain kind of rock and roll.
It did. Well, it ended that. I mean, it was sort of that transition from hair bands and so on, which actually started ending after Guns made it anyway. It started to sort of dissipate. But when they came in, there was a new thing going on. But we were still playing stadiums, and if we'd stayed together, we would have just
And you agreed with the criticisms that Nirvana was making about Axl.
Well, I remember what was going down, and those criticisms were like, I mean, all things considered, I sort of agree.
Right, yeah.
But
that's crazy, man.
But anyway, but that was a cool period. So, but I don't think that it had. There was all that talk about like, will grunge into the whatever. And like for us, it had nothing to do with that.
Right. So grunge wasn't the arch enemy.
No.
Yeah.
And finally, here's an MTV special that appeared back in 2000, 2001. You can tell by Slash's voice that he doesn't seem very healthy, and this is probably around the time he had his cardiomyopathy. And he talked a bit about the death of Nirvana's frontman Kurt Cobain and what it meant and how it was really inevitable, but how the guy wrote some great stuff. Here's the clip.
Hi, I'm Kurt Loder with an MTV News special report on a very sad day. Kurt Cobain, the leader of one of rock's most gifted and promising bands, Nirvana, is dead.
I thought the guy was brilliant. It's a loss, and at the same time, it was probably inevitable that he did what he did, but he wrote some great stuff.
So that does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I've done a couple videos about Guns N' Roses and Nirvana. I think my most popular one was about the entire feud between Guns N' Roses and Nirvana, all the way to present day with what's been going on with Guns N' Roses and Foo Fighters. Most recently, I also did a video about what happened at the MTV Video Music Awards from 1992. And there's also a video about the time that Duff McKagan flew on Kurt Cobain's last flight. That was, I think, March 31st, 1994. Duff wrote a column about it back in 2010, and then he wrote a little bit about it in his book, and he once was heckled by a person, too, about his flight with Kurt Cobain. So I've got those videos up on my channel. You just need to search them, and you can find them. So thanks for watching, guys. Hit the like button, and be sure to subscribe if you love GNR as much as I do. Take care.
Hey, this is Dizzy Reed from Guns N' Roses, and you're watching GNR Central. Yeah!